We are fortunate to have with us Mr. Subhash Chandra Garg. In his 36 years of distinguished service with the government, he's worked in several important capacities in the central government as well as the Rajasthan government. He's also had a stint with the World Bank. On 31st October, he took voluntary retirement from the services. This was 1 year before his retirement was actually supposed to take place. Sir, thank you for speaking to us.
Hello. Thank you.
Why did you decide to take voluntary retirement 1 year before of time?
See, this the job which I did in the government, the last major job, that is the Secretary Economic Affairs. That job gives you a very wide spectrum of issues to work with it. It's the place where the entire economy, the finances, international economic relations and all is what you get to see, get to do work, interact. So I had excellent exposure and opportunity to participate in decision making at the widest possible level. Then some situation arose where it appeared that I would not be able to do that kind of job, and anything else which I thought would be of lesser sort of, not that this job of secretary power is any less important, but in terms of its reach, its width, and its interaction with the widest sense of the economy, I felt it's better to go out of the government and then do it the way you can outside the government. So I would still be involved with the wide swath of the economic, financial, policy and other issues. And that is where I thought it would be much better for me, it will provide me much greater satisfaction and opportunity. And that is the reason I took the voluntary retirement.
Sir, two of your key postings, one in the finance ministry at the center and also at the finance ministry in Rajasthan, these two appointments you have written in your letter were prematurely terminated or prematurely they came to an end. Why do you think that was the case, since this also seems to be your core competency?
In fact, these were 3 occasions, not
yes.
2. It happened twice in Rajasthan. So I was Principal Secretary of Finance, which is in charge of the finance department of the state government, once in 2008 and then again in 2014. So in 2014, the change of government took place, and somehow the new government felt that they should have somebody else in the Ministry of Finance or the Department of Finance as Secretary of Finance. So they decided to change. I thought I was absolutely impartial. I was doing a reasonably good job in my judgment. But this was the call of the government, so that is what led in the first instance. Second was a little more curious. I was appointed without my asking for it by the Government of India as India's ED in the World Bank. That was in fact first time that the Government of India decided to appoint an officer at this level, the additional secretary level. Otherwise, almost all have gone either after they had retired, or they were on the verge of retirement. So this was in a way unique posting, in a kind of distinction. So the state government should have also been happy in the normal circumstances. But somehow the then Chief Minister thought that this is wrong, and what transpired in her mind, I don't know, because I did not have occasion to speak to her later. And she decided that I should be asked to go to the Government of India the same day. So I was transferred or relieved from that position on the day the orders from Government of India came. So whereas the same Chief Minister had so much confidence in my abilities to work as Finance Secretary. In fact, I was her Finance Secretary on both the occasions in 2008 and 2014. And my services were actually specifically recalled by her from the Government of India. I was Additional Secretary here to come and serve as the Principal Secretary of Finance in 2013-14. So it surprised, but it happened. And when it happens in such circumstances, it's a little bit unpalatable. So that's why I just categorize that as a little bit unceremoniously. Not that I had lost anything or I had professionally suffered or I had anything to complain from that point of view. But such a way of departure perhaps was not. And here the story is reasonably well known. And so it happened 3 times. And when I was heading the finance division in either the state or center, I found this to be too coincidental, and that's why just I mentioned in the note.
But what explains the third instance, the what you have also categorized as unceremonious in the finance ministry at the center last month?
So this was, let's not get into the specifics of that, but in short, the situation had got created that possibly my continuance as a professional in the ministry was possibly not going to be there, or there would have been some sort of lame duck kind of thing. So it is better in such circumstances to move on and do something better or something different rather than continuing.
Were there some aspects on which you didn't feel that the decisions being taken were in line with what you would have ideally wanted?
See, in the government, so many decisions are taken, and no civil servant can and should expect that what he or she thinks is the right and the only right decision. So that I have no illusions about it. My job as secretary or as a civil servant is to bring out the real import, implications, options, etc. And the decision is that of the political master at the end. This clarity I have, so I have no problems on that front. And my experience in the Ministry of Finance was that most of the times the advice I offered or the options I came up with were most of the times accepted. So I have no complaint on that front. You can't expect every idea of yours or suggestions to be accepted, which is fine.
Mm-hmm. But then why do you think you felt like a lame duck situation?
No, that's what I'm saying. So certain things or certain decisions were moving, or certain directions was going in some ways which I felt were possibly, so when the proportion of where you feel the way the decisions are going is not something which you should be or you are most comfortable with. So when that proportion changes to a level where I think that's a sense, that's a judgment call, and it's for the individual officer to take that call. So I thought this is the time possibly to do it. In any case, I had only about a year left, so I could sort of take that call that all right, you widen your field of activity and speak from or work from the setting which is not inside the government. So it was easier decision, it was not a difficult decision.
So, I mean, especially regarding the handling of the economy, the government has seen more than its fair share of people leaving their assignments prematurely. You had the chief economic advisor, the governor of RBI, and I mean, you also took a similar decision. Is there a sense that that things are not going the way ideally that people with some economic background would want to?
I don't think that's a fair assessment. Chief Economic Advisor Arvind left after his tenure was over. It was not before. In fact, he had an extension. And during the extension, he had some personal issues. He wanted desperately to go back to the US, and that's what I don't think that was anything to do with any such feeling that he was finding it uncomfortable or anything of that sort. So that's not. Mr. Arvind Pangaria, to my mind, also left on completion, and he wanted to go back to his. Urjit Patel probably had something. There was more professional issues connected with that. So it might be a case of premature, but otherwise, I don't think that's the case. And I had excellent 2 years here, I must say. No cause for complaint.
So you have written that for India to move towards its goal of becoming a $10 trillion economy, policymakers have to think like businessmen, like business persons. So is the government thinking in those terms, or can it be done more?
Basically, we went for more of a socialistic way of organizing production in the country. It was flowing from what communist model came up globally that used to be treated as somewhat of a success model, and therefore many of the activities on the real production side as well as financial side were in fact nationalized, and we over 5, 6, 7 decades built up a system of production of goods and services in the economy which are hugely in the public sector. Private sector was in a way sort of restrained from organizing and doing businesses. By the way, in my judgment, government is not the best of the businessmen. Government is a regulator, government is a governance institution. It functions more on the basis of what is right and wrong, how citizens' rights and citizens' welfare should be taken. It's not, its genius doesn't lie in production of goods and services, and therefore government as a business is much less an optimum arrangement than the private sector producing the goods and services. Government is not which has the capital, government is not one which has the enterprise, and therefore when the government officers work as kind of entrepreneurs, then the efficiency, the competitiveness in production of goods and services cannot be, and I think this is now a worldwide proven system, and therefore it's very necessary in my judgment that we should organize the businesses in the private sector, and for making this happen, for making this shift happen, and in the intermediate period, for whatever business, for whatever time it is required to run, the government should. So government both as a policy maker, because ultimately what is the structure of business in the country, under what policies and what regulations it work is decided by the government. If a government thinks that no, we will not allow markets to function, or we will have only communism or a socialism, or we have, like it was decided in the case of our country also, that the commanding heights and all the basic industries would be only in the government sector. So those decisions are taken by the government. But when the government makes these decisions, if it is guided not by the business, but by considerations for right and wrong, different balancing the different rights, etc., denying the people to make and rise good businesses, big businesses, at that stage, this kind of mindset is very important. So my take, and that's very clear, that whether it's infrastructure, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's services, the government should think from the perspective of a businessman. Then we can have better policies for those businesses. And whatever the government does in the intermediate period, those should be run like businesses. So those are important.
In your opinion, are we still captive to too much statism or too much regulation?
Of course, we have very large state presence, government presence in businesses. Our financial sector, which have now started getting sort of liberalized and opened. Before 1992, almost 95%, 97% of banking was in public sector. Until very soon, almost entire insurance industry was with the government. Now things are changing, but still there is a large dominance of the government in the financial businesses. In infrastructure, still, that is where, and I've given some instances there. In fact, we are seeing the reversal of the trend because the policy which we have. For example, the road sector, at some point in time, there was a lot of interest in the private businesses to take road construction on the BOT and BOT basis, etc. But now, thanks to what policies we have adopted for the land acquisition, the policies otherwise related to financing or making credit available for concessions, etc., there is no interest of the private sector in taking the road projects. The costs have gone up very high. The revenue which comes from the use of that road is very low. The returns are not there. So in such situations, there cannot be any business activity in the private sector. So again, if you think from that perspective, that road business should be organized in a way that this is financially generating returns, then we can organize the business to be taken up in the private sector. But if you don't, then you have most things reverting back to the government, which, because of the constraint of capital, constraint of funding with the government, leads to the outcome where not much happens. So the road construction program gets somewhat stalled or reduced, or for that matter, what's happening now in the power sector. So over the years, we've created much larger capacity in the power sector than the demand. So now you saw last 2 months the power demand going actually down. So there is a degrowth. So unless we see all these things from that perspective of business, ultimately businessman does what? A business does creation of value, which is shared between the factors of production, which is labor and the capital. So unless the value is created, nobody is happy, neither the labor nor the capital. So the thought which you sometimes hear, that government is in the business not for making profit, is a very flawed thought. Unless profit is an element of value add. If you're not generating profit, that means you're not adding value. And if you're not adding value, you're not growing GDP, right? You're not growing the wealth of or the income of the country. And this kind of mindset, which is sometimes we see reflected in the government, to my mind is the root of which need to be taken care for accelerating the growth.
So you've written in your letter that there's very little investment coming into the infrastructure sector. You've also just referring to it as well. But on the other hand, we have the finance minister a couple of weeks back made a statement that there's no better place for investors to come than India. Do you think the government isn't acknowledging that there is a problem?
I don't want to comment on any statement or any rationale provided. I can discuss the issue, so which in my judgment, what I believe is the situation I've just described. So I don't think it's fair to get into any comment on a comment or things.
So there's a lot of concern in the media as well as in general discussions regarding unemployment. Is enough being done to address the crisis, or is too much being made out of it, in your opinion?
Again, my understanding is much of what we hear about unemployment actually is not based on a root cause analysis of the situation. See, employment is generated only if there is a production of goods and service, if there is a value add in the economy. If there is no value addition or there is no growth in the value addition, additional employment will not be generated. No nation, no economy can generate employment by providing government jobs, right? The government jobs are not employment. Only what the government services are required to be paid for or delivered. For that, as many people who are needed to produce those goods and services is what the government should hire. But if the government otherwise just hire for the sake of hiring and does not get any value added from that, that's no employment. That is in a way sinecure, that's in a way paying a dole. It's not job, it's not employment. So the real employment can only take place in the productive sector of the economy, where the production of goods and service requires use of labor, and that is the real employment. Employment can be in any form. It can be manual, it can be high tech, it can be clerical, or it can be providing staff service, anything. So in different forms, the human beings provide their skills for being used in production of goods and services. That is the employment. So employment will take place only if the economy grows, and economy grows in a manner where there is more labor using than the machine using, right? But today we have another major challenge. Besides the automation, which was bringing machines to automate the jobs, now we have the major digital technologies coming, which are literally automating the services job, right? So the skills which we need in the new economy, those need to be available in our labor and our people to get employed. For example, today data services, AI, many of these things which are coming up requires enormous amount of new skills, new people, right? Even our own experience of IT services in last 15, 20, 25 years, providing employment to millions of people happened because those services got produced with the help of our skilled manpower. We wouldn't have produced this with the manual labor or unskilled labor, right? Today, most of the unskilled labor which was used in agriculture or in construction, those jobs are also getting automated. So we have to transform our labor into the jobs of future, right, then the employment will take place, not otherwise.
So, you've written about your experience as a civil servant that more often than not, you have gotten the space to follow an independent approach towards your work. But there have also been times when you have faced certain pushback on that front. From a general point of view of a bureaucrat, are bureaucrats being given the space to follow such an approach, or are they being penalized?
My experience, I would be very candid, in last 30, 35, 36 years, more often than not, I was able to get through to do, even in unconventional way, something which was required or which was desirable to go. The dilemma which the civil servants face many times is that do you go by the rule or procedure, or you do something which will result into the desirable outcome. I'll just tell you one instance, for example, and I have numerous such I can relate. I was chief executive in a soybean processing plant in Kota way back in 1989. The business of that company was to produce oil from the soybeans, right? It was a business. It was in the cooperative sector. The cooperative rules said that if any activity leads to a loss, it will be the personal responsibility of the person taking that decision. Now, you don't know what is a loss many times, so you made a consignment, the consignment didn't go through, or you made a purchase, the purchase led to some problem. So there was such a wide apprehension amongst the officers that if they take a decision, they might be sooner or later be hauled up. And since it's a personal liability, and there were cases from other organizations and all, so this rule had made the entire organization virtually one which doesn't take any decision, right? Now, and the result was that the plant was virtually working at 20% capacity. They were competent people, they were competent engineers, they were competent finance people, right, and other people. But they were rendered indecisive because of this way the government had organized this business. I somehow, maybe today I won't take that decision, but I felt if we are taking a right decision, we must take a decision, because otherwise we will certainly not succeed in doing the business. Chances of succeeding in doing the business is much better if you take the right kind of decision. For example, you can't buy something, some part had gone broken. You need to have an emergency replacement to run the plant, right? Now, if you go by the old rule, float 3 tenders, give them 3 weeks, etc., the plant will not work. You have to have the emergency purchase. The rules don't permit. So I simply took a decision, audacious kind of thing, that you decide, and wherever you feel that there is some doubt about it, in future it might be, you get my approval. And I'll take the responsibility for that decision. And go and do it in the way the business is done. You wouldn't believe the decision shirkers became decision makers. And in 6 to 8 months, that plant started operating at 120%. We made profit, right? And it was such a successful thing at that time that it brought 5 or 6 private industries in that area, on the argument that if a Sarkari factory can succeed, we can do much better. So, and there are several such issues where you tweak the rule to see that what is desirable to be done gets done. I must say, almost always I have got the support. Finally, there have been some questions, but support, and generally Maybe it is because almost most of the times the decision finally turned out to be beneficial for the government, and there were not many failures. If there were failures, perhaps the situation might have been different. So to my mind, I think my experience suggested that we must be making decisions. We should take the risk, due risk which is required. Otherwise, the risk of running failure is much higher.
So, two young civil servants, Kannan Gopinathan and Sashikant Senthil, resigned from the service, and their reasons are that India's democratic ethos aren't being respected. That's what they are saying. And they find it morally difficult to continue representing the government. What do you think when you hear young civil servants just in the beginning of their career, just 4-5 years into the service, feeling this way?
I think these two cases which you have cited are in a different space, that the space which I've been more associated and comfortable. The industry, the economy and otherwise. So these are more of kind of political thinking or more of feeling about these rights and wrongs kind of thing. All that I would say that I respect their judgment. Again, if they felt that this is the way things are and they would be better speaking their mind out and doing it from the civil society or from outside the government, I think they were entitled to do. In fact, this may perhaps be may lead to a larger question of this being a 36, 37, 38 years job kind of thing. To some extent, this has been changed now because there is we have gone to this contribution based pension system. So whatever you contribute during whatever number of years you serve, you get your investment back. There is no pension as such, and there is no condition that you have. Well, the concept earlier was that you have a lifelong employment, and the security of the service was also designed from that point of view, that you should be able to do in a fearless manner thanks to the security of service, right? So this change now perhaps provide, and also the intake of the officers which are coming, many from technical backgrounds, many from having done jobs which are which in a way paid them much more than what the government pays and all. And therefore, if at any stage they feel that they can and they're better off outside the government, I think one should respect their judgment. And this shows the vibrancy of the service. I don't think this is an indication that things have deteriorated or things have earlier probably people did not have that kind of opportunity and courage to decide. Today they have, and they take the call. That's fine.
Thank you, sir, for speaking to the Quint.